when we are waiting for the electronics to work, here is a question for you, and it will lead us to a different topics that we'll touch briefly, but will be very cool. So I have a room, and in this room I have a lamp, and numerically all the rays that coming, all the light that comes from this lamp all the rays that comes from this lamp are horizontal. Everything is horizontal. I don't have anything that is diagonal or vertical. Now, the wall, I just look at the left wall and the right wall. The other walls are completely black and accumulate all the light. And this lamp sends say 10 watts per energy per every square inch. That is, look at 1 square inch. 1 square inch over here. And on this square inches pixel, there are 10 watts that are falling from the camera directly. From the camera directly, there are 10 inch per each square inch. And the camera is looking at this wall, and had I ignored the left wall, then the camera would report that every pixel here, every square inch, gives me exactly this unit of energy. I decided to use watts instead of the standard units of luminosity, but you can use any energy or intensity. So without this wall, you're getting how much energy is coming, how illuminated is this. Well, what the camera sees is exactly what is reflected from the wall, which is 0.5. So if I have 10 watts that are falling on it, then 5 watts are reflecting, and that's what the camera would reply. But the camera would reply that 5 watts, but only if I remove this other wall. Similarly, if the camera is looking at the left wall, then it will return, there are 10 watts falling on it, from which 0.3 is returned, so it returns 3 watts. That's the intensity of every pixel or every square inch that you see from the left wall. If in the absence, if I completely remove the right wall. My question from you is, what are the intensities that the camera sees here on this wall? Ignore that the camera is very tiny, no shadow of the camera, no shadow of the lamp. Everything is completely horizontal, and what the intensity is that comes from here. Yeah?
Do you have to factor in like light bouncing back and forth between?
And I have to factor light coming back and forth. And there is a correct way to do it, and there is an incorrect way to do it.
Can I try the incorrect way? So would it just be, if you're not accounting for multiple bounces, it would be like 0.8, right? Because it would be the light that bounces off that wall plus the light that bounces off.
I don't know, it would be some infinite arithmetic. There is a, like it would be, there are some light that is reflected directly. Now, some light hits the left wall, bounce, hits the right wall, bounce, and now collected by the camera. And on top of it, there are lights that are bounced, 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 multiple times, and so on. So it's the little puzzle that it always reminds me that I think Newman is arguably the wonderful Newman that was asked about a fly. There are two cars that moving toward each other, and there is an extremely fast fly that flies between them, and what's the total sum of length that this fly moves. So the fly moves from left to right. The moment that it hits the right car, it turns around, starts flying towards the left car. move to the right car, but these two cars are moving toward each other. And you can solve it by getting some expression of geometric summation and get the correct result. And so I leave it for you to meditate on it, looking for the less tedious answer. I'll play with Dropbox. Do you want to give the promo about what you're going to talk about next on Wednesday?
Yeah. So basically, it's a lot like what we were doing in homework 5, the last one, where we had the pool. But my research has to do with polarization. So in homework 5, we just had a slider for the transmission versus reflection. The way that you actually calculate that, there's a mathematical formula, but you have to look at the polarization of the light. So I'll talk a little bit about what I'm doing with computer ray tracing and rendering using polarization.
And that's under your research with?
Yeah, this is research I'm doing in optical science under Meredith Kapinski in the polarization lab. That's the group.
Yeah, was mentioning was that the intention was to send it to SIGGRAPH. SIGGRAPH is something that you should burn many hours looking at videos from SIGGRAPH. That's by far the top and extremely competitive conference for computer graphics. And part of the submission of every paper is to also submit a 4-minute video that describe what they're doing. So you don't need to be very concentrated to see what's hot in graphics. And so yeah, YouTube for SIGGRAPH. So we mostly talked about smoothing. We asked, why should I smooth or make more blurry an image that is a bit blurry already? And what I hopefully convince you is that if I look at the correct parameters, I can take an image, make it more blurry, that is convolve it with Gaussian or tent or a box, takes the difference between them, and the difference, meaning look at this pixel at the very same coordinates just after the blurriness, and takes the difference between them, this minus this. And if you're getting exactly the same color RGB in both cases, then you'll get a black pixel at the same location. But if this value is different than this value at this pixel, you'll get something which is non-zero, and it will just take the ABS or add something to it. So black would be 0, and everything that is non-zero will be positive. So suddenly you start to see white spots, and where are these white spots? Exactly where you have boundaries of the original shape, implying that this minus this is a high pass, and the high pass has a maximum reaction exactly when you have a boundary between, as we said, if this is my original image, high 0, 0, and I take this, convolve it with a Gaussian, this convolved with this, taking the smoothness, then I get this convolved with this will be, all these pixels will still be 0, now move gradually over here, staying 1 out there, and now gradually goes down. Now this minus, that would be the low pass, so source minus low pass would be this AKG signal that you have a strong reaction exactly at the boundaries. And now you can take the original image, and the beauty is that it's done completely in optical methods. Take the original image, add to it the high pass, and you're getting something that has much stronger signal on the boundaries, which didn't really add any details, but give us the optical illusion that the boundaries are much more pronounced. So it looks much sharper. You didn't really add details, but you make the boundaries over dramatized, if you want. There are stronger intensities at the background, so that's the feelings that we are left with. Another example, input image, same instrument, boundaries in white, everything that is a non-boundary, uniform, either the coat or the sky, appears in black because it's the same before and after the low pass, high pass. Add the high pass to the original image and you look at something that looks sharper. Okay? And that's just Wikipedia for it. You can do the whole thing by just the high pass and the low. How do you get low pass from an image? How do you?
Gaussian and
blur. But that's predate computers by a bit.
Negative.
We'll get to take the image, just develop it where it's not exactly in the right zoom. But blurriness, just get it deliberately a bit out of zoom, out of focus, sorry. Change the focus so it's deliberately blurry. And then take the negative of this one and add to the original image, and voila, you have exactly the effect of sharper image. Okay, more example of enhancement. You can definitely go too far on it. The idea that there are universal constants that will work for every image. It's not that realistic. You'll improve some images, you'll over-dramatize or other ones, or make, so you probably want something more adaptive, but that's fine. We have some intuitive feeling about what is the edge that separates between regions, but it's only intuitive region, and formal definition, I can give many formal definitions, and they are both okay in some cases. Not. What if I tell you that at this region, all the way from x smaller than 3, my y equals 0, and now at x equals 3 exactly, y equal 1, then it's not too hard to guess that the boundary that between these two regions is exactly at x equal 0. So that was a no-brainer. What? I'm just jumping from one uniform value to another one. It's trickier to define boundary if that's not exactly uniform. What happens if this function is slightly monotonic? This function is slightly monotonic but non-constant, so it's not constant in this region, it's not constant in this region, but still there is a big gap in between. Would I define it as a gap, as a boundary, or would I say that if this portion is so short then it's just a noise? Up to you. Okay, but at least you got the feeling of the boundary. Again, I start with an image that consists of completely black regions that Boolean jump to be completely white. Boolean comes completely black. Again, do the smoothing, take the difference between the smoothing, take the original image minus the smoothing, and you'll get strong signal, strong reaction somewhere near the boundary. We can agree what are the boundary here. So the high pass 0 everywhere, except when I have a change of moving from left to right. Let's play more with other type of convolution. We'll go back to smoothing, but let's play with other type of convolution. I have a function, f of xy, and I want to think about the derivative of x. Derivative of x is, derivative by x is f of x plus delta x for the same y minus f of x minus h delta x y divided by, in this case, 2 times delta x, 2h, and takes the limit of this expression when h goes to 0, which is exactly the definition of derivative, except that my image is digitized. I only have pixels, so I cannot make h smaller than 1. But I can still think about the approximation of the derivative. The discrete approximation of the derivative by x would be what? For the derivative, x plus delta x plus h. Let's just call delta h 1. Well, h 1 because that's the smallest that I can have, which is an integer. The next one will be a f of x, which I don't care. So it's f of x plus 1, that is using h as 1, minus f of x minus h, x minus 1, divided by 2 times h, but h is 1, so divided by 2. So that's an approximated description of the derivative by x, the partial derivative by x, of this image. These are intensities. What does it mean? Let's do a convolution of the image. Convolution of the image. And now I'll do the convolution just for simplicity. Here is my image, lines by lines, lots of pixels. And at each moment, I'll just do it for my convolution window, are just 3 pixels over here. Here are my 3 pixels. Convolve the function with this mask that is minus half, 0 and half. That will give me the value at x equal 5, say. And then I'll move the window, like convolution in general. I'll move the window by 1 step. So now the center is at x equal 6. That's the middle center. And what do I write in this block? What do I write in this block? According to this mask, this kernel, the value at the middle is the value to the left of the middle times minus 1, plus the value at the middle times 0, plus the value to the right times plus half, sum them all up. So I can do it row by row, or analogously, I can do it column by column. Here is another sign. I told you that there is no shortage of signs for convolution, and there is no consensus about what exactly said. Another sign of convolution. Why not? And I run it on this image. Is this a convex combination, by the way? Are the weights in this kernel are convex combination? No. Absolutely not. Convex combination needs to be both all positive and needs to sum up to 1, which means that the average intensity before, when I run it on the image, should be the average intensity after run the convolve it. I shouldn't lose energy. But what does it do? What happened to our poor lizard under this filter, this kernel? And this filter is just what we saw in the previous slide, except that I multiplied by half the whole thing, but I cared about the weight, so it wouldn't change much. So instead of minus half and half, I have minus 1 and 1 and multiply everything by half if you don't want. But look at this image and what's the result of convolving it with this filter. Clearly, we see that regions that are uniform, give us almost no signal, becomes zero, barely see any boundaries. But you see boundaries here, and these boundaries give me some white signal over here. That was for all the gain with boundary detection, but there is more subtlety here. Help? Out of all the edges of the boundaries of this image, which ones have higher chance to survive the filter? Which one are smooth? If vertical ones at which the gap to the left and the gap to the right will stay, they will pass the filter, they will survive. Anything that is vertical, since my filter is horizontal, vertical boundaries tends to be enhanced, and horizontal boundaries, or something that is close to the horizontal, mostly moderate slope, will be cancelled by the -1 +1, so it's not pronounced to this extent. Well, so this is a filter that enhances vertical boundaries. And analogously, these filters, that one on each column, look at all the boundaries, which one are enhanced? Let's take this one, for example. Which one are enhanced? Boundaries that are horizontal will survive the filter. Boundaries that are horizontal will smear, will burn. I don't see any sign of disagreement. The example to look at in this image for horizontal boundary, look at the mouse, look at the mouse. Here, horizontal line around the mouse are definitely enhanced for the vertical filter, and are definitely completely vanishing when I'm using the horizontal boundary. On the other hand, it's less pronounced, but horizontal edges over here will be highlighted also. Everybody buys, everybody understand? Let's play a bit more with this. I don't want to make it completely a computer vision course, but and I don't want to assume that you remember too much from calculus, but gradient. Let's have a vector where its first component is the derivative by x, second is the derivative by y per each pixel. And since I don't have the exact derivative, I have the approximate derivative. That is, takes a pixel, takes 2 pixels to its left and right, that's derivative by x, take above and below are the derivative by y. And now we said that's approximate the derivative by x, that's approximate, that's filter, derivative by y. And now I'm getting a vector, because now every point on the original image has 2 values, one derivative by x, derivative by y. And if I assign it for each point, take every point, apply this derivative, the gap between the left and the right, multiplied by -1 and 1. The same for derivative by y. Now we have two values, gx and gy. Think about this vector. This vector has a length and has a direction. Where does this vector point to in this image? So like what, yeah, so this vector points to here, this vector points to here, points to here, but why? What's special about these directions?
Is it pointing towards like the nearest edge? It's pointing towards the least change?
It's a point toward, I think, the maximum change. It's the steepest descent, either with the maximum change positively or maximum negatively. But let's think about it. If I'm following the tangents, if I'm following the orthogonal vector, I'm staying in exactly the same intensity. It's like walking on a contour on the map. I'm staying in the same height. If I want the steepest descent, the direction at which I'm getting the fastest change of elevation, I'll follow the gradient, either up or down. So I get a very, very fast way to estimate the gradients for each point. And that's really important when I start to play with image analysis, because it tells me between two images, start to find points or define boundaries and define special points that you want to match between the two images. And such points might be ones at which a gradient is really large. But the length of this vector tells me how fast it is changing in this direction. Right? Just a quick example. If I write the line y equal 3x plus 2, this line, then what happened to this function of x and y? From some point, go in the direction of 3, 1, and you are moving to another point that gives you the same revenue. That's moving along the time, moving along the line. The gradient move by the same amount, 1 meter, but along the gradient, you'll get a maximum change on this function. Cool. So again, this is generated via convolution, but two convolution, one with the horizontal, one with vertical, or you can combine it to one pass of the function. Okay. More example of playing with gradient, both in terms of size and in terms of which direction will it point to. And I can compute similarly one more example. Derivative, maybe it's the first time that you see derivative as a high pass filter. Right? It's basically all I'm doing is ask, when do I have high changes in the intensity? Slow changes vanishes as a gradient. High changes is what I'm getting in the resulting function as large values. So derivative here is nothing but high pass filter. And look at the seal derivative by x. What does it enhance? Vertical boundaries. Vertical, mostly vertical. Horizontal boundaries are smeared, vanished. The derivative by x. Derivative by y, just the opposite. Horizontal boundaries, semi-horizontal, enhanced. What did you say? Vertical boundaries enhanced. horizontal one from left to right, these boundaries vanish. This one and this one, now think about this as the x coordinate, this as a y coordinate of a as an x coordinate and the y coordinate of a vector, and now you have a vector associated to each point where this vector points to the gradient, to the direction of the gradient, the steepest change. How long is this vector? Depending on how dramatic the change is. So the boundary will be the points for which the gradient is really large. Okay, let's move it. If you want to move beyond the first derivative, yet another convolution with a different mask. I want to move on. Back to smoothing. So here is my smoothing function. And my original input, let's open it in Google so we don't have to worry about all these commercials jumping up. First, data points. Here are my data points in green. For every, so the x is the location of the pixel, in this case xij, but I just will pick one row of pixels. So just the x coordinate. And here is my signal, the intensities of the image at various points. And right after this point, I'm jumping to this data point. Remember that at x equal 9 or 10 roughly, that would be my next data point, the next data point, and so on. So can I define boundaries here? Yes and no. It's not a constant value, it's this whole region, but I'll argue that it still looks very much a boundary of a region to me. The average over here is extremely small compared to the jumps that I need to do to get to the different region. So I care to know what are the boundaries here, what is the boundaries here, and I want to run a smoothing filter, low pass filter, on the green point, on the data point. And naively, when I'm moving this very basic smoothing function, what do? It's a window or a box smoothing function, box kernel. What do? At position I, so in this case, I look at position 3, I look at 1 pixel to the left, look at 1 pixel to the right, sum up the intensities of all these 3 pixels. Let's give each one of them weight of half, weight of third, multiply by the intensities, sum it up, and that would be the new value that I'll get at this point. And it will appear around here. Okay, so how do I get the Brown function? Every pixel is every green pixel is replaced by the average of the pixel itself, averaged with the pixels to its left and the pixels to its right, all with equal weight. And now let me write the idea that I mentioned many times, but worth enough to mention it again. Always sums to 1 or positive. So the way that you see that I gave to each pixel here is 1, 1, 1. And obviously I will need to multiply it by a third, because I need to multiply to divide by 3, because that's a sum of the weight. So in generally it would be sigma of Wi times f of xi. That would be the average before I normalize. And since I want to make sure that they sum up to 1, I will normalize it by sigma of Wi, the weights that I'm using at this moment. So if the weights that I'm using are 1, 1, 1, then the sigma of the Wi is just 3. 1, 1, 1. And the smoothing filter does exactly what I want inside this region. Right? You're getting that the average of every window of 3, the average of every window of 3 is somewhere, well, it's not a constant, but it definitely doesn't jump up and down too dramatically comparing to the jumping up and down in the original noise. It's much smoother. That this signal that goes through the green is much more noisy than the signal that goes through the smoothed function, that is the average. And exactly the same behavior I will get for the region over here, where again every brown point is the average of the 3 nearby. So where does the trouble start? And that brings us to the hollow blares that added to the image in the HDR. What should the pixel return right now? This pixel gets weight of 1, this pixel gets weight of 1, weight of 1, average between them, that's a value that you are getting, all good. That's a dramatic moment. I'm averaging these 3 pixels, weight of 1, weight of 1. Remember, green is the data, and weight of 1. But now this point comes from a very different region. And the average of this and this and this will be the point which is right here. I wanted to smooth this region, which sharply ends and moves to this region. But now, because of the size of my smoothing filter, at this moment, I'm getting some average between the value here and the value here. Everybody sees? Because now my sample set, my neighborhood is the pixel itself, green, still in the left region. This pixel, still in the left region. But I let this intruder enter to my sample, this green point, which comes from a very different region. And now I average between the whole 3, each one with weight of 1. And that's the point that I'm getting. It's somewhere in between. And if I'll move the window by one step, then I'm adding this value with weight of 1 or weight of third, this value with weight of third, they are both fine, they are in this region. But also this value that belongs to the different region, also with weight of third. So the averaging is somewhere here. So the new curve that I'm getting, instead of moving all the way to this region, jump and continue in this region, this curve is nicely in this region unless I'm getting close to the boundary at which it's gradually start to go up and move continuously to this region instead of having a sharp point. And sometimes that's exactly what I want, but sometimes not. Like we saw in the HDR example that it had funny colors near the trees where these colors don't exist. So what's the solution? How can we solve this example? So far this algorithm was almost completely human-free, no handmade parameters when we played with HDR. We only had to decide what's a filter, what's the size of the convolved region, and that's it. What's a sigma, or how many pixels you're taking, and that's it. At this point, you need to start having the user fine-tune, what do I call, how do I decide that this gap between these two guys, these are still pixels in the same region, but between these two pixels, it's too dramatic, so I decided there are different regions. User input here, I need to change some other value, D, that will tell me I consider them in the same region or not. But let's decide that this human did a decent job. Definitely in this toy example, I made it easy to pick that here the values are about 4, here the values are about 8. If you decide that the gap in the y value between two pixels is more than 4, let's decide that they belong to different regions. Let me write it down. I'm looking at the intensity at 2 pixels, pi plus 1. It could be, the techniques that I'm describing is much more general than just for HDR. In the HDR, I'm looking at the intensities of 2 neighboring pixels, and I'll decide that if the gap between the intensities of a pixel and its neighbor is less than d, then pi plus 1 are still in same region. Otherwise, different region. Okay, that's the beginning of the idea. That already helps me to identify this pixel as an outlier, as a noise, because the gap between it and most of the pixels over here is more than, say, d equal 8. This gap is too large, so I want to extract this pixel. I have a set of pixels right now. I have the set of pixels just because that's the example that I tried this. It's an extremely tiny window, only with 3. Probably in your homework you want to take about 20 by 20 pixels, a bit more, a bit less. But you're looking at most of the pixels, look at the average or the max mean, and decide that these are the pixels that I want to use in the smoothing, and this pixel I want to extract, even though it's in my neighborhood, Remember, usually in the convolution, I'm looking at my neighborhood and I sum up the values from everybody in my neighborhood. Here, the idea of the bilateral or triliteral function is that even though there are pixels that belongs to my neighborhood in terms of my geographic distance to them, how far they are in the image, I'm looking at one more parameter. I'm looking at the intensities. It's not only the location of the pixel, it's also the intensity of this pixel versus the intensity of the pixel that I'm concentrated in the center pixel. And if this gap of the center pixel is too large, user-defined parameter B, too large, then I'm not going to compute the average of all the 3 pixels. I'm going to only compute the average of the pixels which are in my region, which I want to take into account. So we had before that we had W9, which was third, which was 1. W9P9 plus W10P10 plus also 1 plus W11P11. That's without the bilateral correction. 1, 1, 1. Pi are the intensity. If these are ones and I want the average, then of course I need to divide it by W9 plus W10 plus W11. So the sum of weights will sum up to 1. But now, using the trick of the bilateral function, what should I do right here? The moment that I decided that pixel 11 should be excluded, what should I do to this formula?
Recalculate the sum.
I'm saying that this W11 is excluded, but if I keep the denominator the same, then the sum of the weights don't sum up to 1. It will not be a convex combination. So I'll exclude W11 also from this part. So right now, the weights that I'm having sum up to 1. It's still a convex combination. I just excluded some pixels because they're undesired. Why are they undesired? They take a region of the image that is too far, that is too different than the region that I'm smoothing. Or the same explanation, because I just hit the boundary of the image and I have a window of 3 or window of 20, but some of these pixels don't exist. They're outside the boundary of the image. So I'm not dividing by all the sum of weights, but only the sum of weights that are relevant for this particular one. So it's still the average that I'm using. Okay. Same deal, just with different kernels. What we don't want here is the kernel is much larger, many larger pixels. Without the bilateral trick, if that's my data, I'll gradually move, and by doing so, I smooth down in the image. I create fuzziness, I create blurriness between the left region and the right region. If I want to smooth but still keep the boundaries respected, I need to use the bilateral trick. Only sum up the weight that you're actually using. Okay, same example once again. Data, the non-bilateral going smoothly, well, not smoothly, but at least gradually. Instead of having values, sharp image will have the values only around 12 or around 20. the unwanted blurriness in this case will have values that change for all steps between 12 and 20, including a few pixels with 14, a few pixels with 18, and so on. And hopefully everybody understands why it creates the strange halo near the trees in the HDR examples. Because when you have the region of the tree and the sky, in pixels that are close to both the tree and the skies, don't average only the tree or average only the sky, but average some combination of both of them. Okay, same thing again. I have the convolution SI, smoothness of I, for all the pixel j. Look at f of j, intensity, times the weight that you are planning to give these points, that without a bilateral tweak, so the sigma of the W of j is 1 and they are all positive. And if I want to exclude some of them, I'll call a pixel j useful or not useful. You can throw whichever criteria you want, as if a pixel is used for pixel I or not. You say, if the gap between them is too large for my test, then it make it unuseful, useless pixel. And I'll define new weight W prime at I minus j to be W of I minus j, the original weight, normalized by the sum of weights of only the useful pixels. Only the useful pixels. Only the location of the weights of the useful pixels contribute to the weight. So since these guys, including this one, sums up to 1 and I excluded somebody, then this sum is something smaller than 1. So the weight of these guys increase. And again, they sum to 1. Okay. So for box filter, if Gij is 1 if the intensity between I and j is less than 1, otherwise it's 0, then instead of summation, which is f of j w of I minus j, standard in the box, I'll define the new smoothing function, s of j, which is look at the nearest, all the neighbors that are around I. So here I don't distinguish between useful and unuseful pixels. That's not where I'm making the determination if the pixel is useful or useless. I'm summing up in the same size of the box, always 10 to the left, 10 to the right. Same sum of the box, f of j times, look at what's happening. Sorry, we have a few expressions coming up. W prime of ij, gij. What is this? What is gij? Gij is a function that determines use this pixel or don't use this pixel. It's either pixel that is useful or not. How do you decide if it's useful or not? In this toy example, if the gap between I and j is less than 10, then I'll define this pixel as useless, and then it will be 0. If the gap is smaller than 10, then it's a legit pixel, multiplied by the weight of ij, weight prime. What is the weight prime of ij? Is the original weight divided by, and here you have the same gij again. Wij sum up all the weight of the ij, times, but in the summation, only the pixels that are useful contribute something to the summation. Otherwise, this term is 0, and you just don't take it into account. Okay, so instead of having the gradual smooth, you have now a sharp smooth, even though it is a low pass filter, but in the boundary between this region and this region, the jump is sharp. Okay, you don't introduce blurriness in this case. Okay, so in this case, once again, example of gap of 3. What do I have in the denominator? It could be that I take only, normally I take 3 values, 1, 1, 1, so I'm dividing by 3. But if I decided that one of these 3 pixels is useless, then there is only 1 plus 1 divided by 2. And if I decide that both are useless, then I'm just dividing by 1. But still convex combination. Okay. More examples, we had it. Just let you play with different functions. And the same trick helps you with boundaries. If you're near the boundary, then you just don't have all the values around you. Then you can use a bilateral smoothing trick. There are other tricks to handle boundaries, like jumping a bit. You want to compute what is maybe not the boundary, but the gradient next to the boundary. There are hacks that your original image, but now put another copy, virtual, of the image to the sides, and now at least every pixel have 20 by 20 pixels around it that you can use. Doesn't mean that they are all useful, but at least you are not running into core dump or exceeding the boundary of the array. Okay, so that's common tricks to handle convolution in general near the boundary of the image. Okay, and at the end, I lost. Yeah, and we can leave it at this point. I see that I lost a slide, but it's fine, and we should talk about this example. So I want to start topics that I'm going to tell you very little about, but just to highlight the method. Again, this wall returns 0.5 of the energy that falls on it. Whatever the colors are, both blue. Everything is blue here, so that's 0.5, whatever falls here. That would be 0.3, whatever falls here. Much darker material returns much less light. And I want to compute what is the intensity that the camera sees. And we can do it by ray tracing. That is to say, out of the 10 watts that falls on this wall, there are 5 watts that goes to the opposite wall, from which the 5 times 0.3 giving me about 1.2 watts that are added to this wall, from which returns to the camera, etc., and lets the flight goes back and forth. Or we can try a much cooler philosophical method and much more general. So looking at this image, more slide coming up, but looking at the image that the camera sees, you're asking, the room is dark, and then I turn on the lamp, and as I turn on the lamp, light's moving quite fast from side to side, and then the camera noticed that it changed from darkness, from blackness, to light, but no, I don't see any changes with time. The intensity is the same with time. It doesn't think, I'm not changing the camera parameter nor the lamp parameter, so everything is fixed with time. But if everything is fixed with time, then let x be the total light or energy from left wall. And let y be the total energy from the white wall. And I think that energy per, per square inch, whatever the camera noticed. What I should report is, of course, what I care is just what the camera says, which is X coming from here, but I'll need Y coming from here as well. So what is the total energy that is coming from camera? We said 10 inch. And how much fall on the left wall? How much energy fall on the right wall? On white wall fall how much? 10 watts. They are coming from the camera, plus this Y sends 10 watts to the right. Why, I don't know yet. Plus Y watts that coming from the white wall. So whatever goes to the white wall would be 10 watts from the camera plus Y. Y is, they define Y by how much the energy that is falling on the white wall. So falling on the white wall is 10 watts from the camera plus Y watts reflection from the left wall. What can I say about the left wall? Everything that comes from X reaches Y. We said that all the light is horizontal. All the rays are horizontal. So far, I don't know, it didn't help me much about what is X and Y, but that's where I'm trying to get. Do you see ways to squeeze more equations from this example? So far, I didn't use at all the reflectivity from the walls themselves. Let's do it slower. When we start, let Y prime would be the light reflected from left. What's the relationship between Y and Y prime? Y is how much is falling on the left, Y prime is how much is reflected from the left. Help?
0.3.
Y prime is 0.3 Y. We said that out of all the light that hits the left wall, that was part of the input, 30% is reflected. Similarly, if that's X prime, then X prime equals 0.5 X. 50% is written. And now we are getting close to the punchline. X, what falls on the left wall equals 10 that comes from the light, no, from the lamp, plus what goes from the left wall plus Y prime. But how much light is falling on the right wall? What the lamp sends to it? plus what the left wall sends to it. The left wall sends y prime. The left wall sends y prime. So on the right wall, that's the amount of, that's the light falls on white wall. So now we have one equation that involves only x and y. And what about y? It is 10 for the same reason, what the light sends to it, plus what's coming from the right, plus x prime. Sorry, mistake. X is 10 plus, plus 1 prime. I erase the prime by merge it with curly brackets, plus y prime, which is 10 plus, what is y prime? Which is 10 plus 0.3 y. Y is 10 plus x prime. X prime is what the white wall sends towards the left. But we already established that x prime is, am I right, 0.5x. Did we establish that x prime is 0.5x? Hopefully you can solve these two guys. There was no recursions between the two of them. What was a big idea behind it? That there are no changes of time and no vanishing of energy. Some of the energy is observed by the walls themselves, but what is not observed by the wall is just reflected to this direction. And because there are no changes in time, the intensity doesn't increase, the idea does not become brighter or dimmer, then x and y are fixed and I can compute it. In this very simple toy example, it's just system with two equations, two variables. And now we can find x and y, and that's it. And you don't have the recursive. Where is this going next? Is this useful? Oh yeah, it's very slow, but it's very useful because instead of looking at the whole environment as something that consists of billion paths of light from every point to every point, let's just ask for every 2 patches of the light, at least every 2 patches of the wall, how much of the light that comes on it, that I still don't know, will fall on this part and vice versa. So I'll create a system with, here it's a linear system with only 2 variables. In a larger room, I will have many other variables and I'll add a bit more physics, but it's still the best way to get the highest results when you are asking my blue wall sends some light to the purple wall that in turn sends some combined light to the next wall, and so on. When I have every color is a combination. There are classical examples where every patches of surface is some combination of colors from every other patches in different colors of the light. And you want to create a realistic image. Your computer will think about it for quite a while, and there is lots of work about expediting it. There is a lot of work even to ask which patches you see, which other patches of the wall. If I draw a little patch and ask what patches here see this patch, on which you'll answer, if you want a quick answer, to ask in the use room what sees this patch. If you want a quick answer, you will put a virtual camera here and use a Z buffer, just a depth buffer to ask who sees whom and what's area. But at the end of the day, you'll end up with a very large system of equations, and your computer will stay it about for quite a while, but you are avoiding ray tracing completely. Notice at no point I didn't ask about a particle that moves from this wall to this wall to this to this, and keep bouncing in between the two. So it must be static, and it's just a linear combination, and that's the whole philosophy that I'm going to try. So I'll show you some more examples next meeting, but that's essentially the point that I wanted to show you. And how much time would you need? I mean, you're welcome to use as long as, and that's
20, 30 minutes. I can
Okay.
take however long. I can go fast, but it's a
No, I
there's
mean-
a little bit of math to explain at the
Yeah,
beginning. So 20
and get the feeling from the class what if they want deeper or shallower. Or, yeah, but 20, 30 minutes. So I'll show a bit more about this method, and I'll show a bit more about bilateral, triliteral methods, what the result that it creates, that are real. And I'll show about one of the coolest techniques that Google for it. It's not complicated and it's very nice. What is ambient light? Remind me. Ambient light.
Like the light that comes from our sky. Right?
Light that appears in any point, but not affected by any obstacle. Assume that there is always some light, no matter how many obstacles. So the technique that I'm going to mention is ambient shadow, which is a branding because there is a built-in contradiction between ambient and shadow. There's a contradiction, but it's the name of a technique that is very popular in game design and give you really a dramatic feeling of portion of the scenes that are in the dark versus portions that are in the light, and along the way avoids ray tracing altogether, staying only in the level of calculation, in the depth buffer only, and still works fantastic. Very cool technique, relatively recent, I think from 2009, 10, so relatively recent. We'll talk about this one as well. And yeah, and we still have a bit animation, and I think that's mostly what we'll talk about. Maybe a bit Gaussian splatters if we have time. Thank you. Your homework 6, if you want to do, all ready for you to play with this. Homework 6 is a smoothing of the scene. The part of the smoothing is that it didn't make sense to do the convolution on the CPU. So we just asked to do the convolution on the shaders themselves, which they are completely capable of doing.
Have you decided on a due date for that yet?
I've never decided what to do. I'll say something, and when people ask, I'll say, theoretically, I shouldn't have homework in the last week of the class, but then if people ask for extensions, I'll do. It shouldn't slow me down from passing the grade when it's time. That's the only real parameter out there. So I publish a date for motivation, but it's not that if people require more time, I'll decide that that's the hill that I'm not going to, that I'm going to insist on.
About the date of the final. So on this list it said to be on Thursday, like the 15th, which is the day before commencement, and there's also like other like graduation stuff happening. So I was wondering if it would be possible for like people who are graduating, if we could have like an earlier date to take the final, or if it would be like
So whether either before the class, after the class, yeah, maybe we'll find someday before the after. The philosophy of why neither before the class is that there could be a few scenarios. You can be very honest and not share it with anybody, and that's great. You can be very friendly and share it with everybody, and that doesn't scare me. You can be partially friendly and share it with 80% of the class, but there will be a few that will not go and get a copy of the exam, And that's what I prefer because they have all the reasons to be with it. So not before final, after in the next day or two, find a time for Zoom or something if necessary.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm running the big picture now.
Okay, so
It
just
went
that Thursday,
from
it's like the only thing that
small,
makes
even
sense.
the small picture.
If you cannot take it with the rest of the class, and assume that other students will be in similar situation, but then we'll decide about the time after the next day or so.
Well, it's
Next day or
more
2
an
days.
issue of like pushing it out later is just worse for graduation and stuff, and like having things for getting like
Even
credit for classes towards your, I mean, like, I'm doing the A&P, so like, I'm in like a weird situation with it, but because I am graduating from undergrad and doing the masters, but, so doing later is not really, like, that would be more so if like other people need it for like the graduation thing, it would be more of like trying to take it before.
And then so when I.
Yeah, but
yeah,
that's
it
not,
makes no sense.
that's not an option because
Yeah.
as a disaster that it's slightly diffused for some students. Is asking for being through.
It is so fast. I actually ran one run already. But I defined a
course,
too small, so it already.
I can worry about it at what the university is doing every semester. And there is always cases like this. Basically, I have 72 hours to start before anybody starts
Because
hearing
I
about
defined a
what
radius too small, I
about
tried
the
to
grade. And even after
make a
that,
small radius first
if
just to test it out.
I cannot legally give an incomplete, but I can get away with
I mean, no
it for as
intersection.
long as it's
So
a
finished
day
now.
or two.
But the
So
radius so small.
it's never an issue.
Actually, I made it 16,
oh,
so now
it's
two.
an issue, but it's
3 times more, so it's 9 times.
it's
more.
solvable
So it
issue
should be
by
4.5 hours.
Zoom later
Like
if you're not in
make
town.
finish
If you're in
in the
town,
middle of the
swing by.
Is that on the laptop?
Yeah, it's running right now. It is so cool. Took a while
Hi.
to figure out.
I was just wondering when you would be able to get the like midterm stuff graded. I had some of the like handwriting questions, but I think I sent them to you last week. Typed up.
C++ code.
I just want to like know where I stand in the class before finals.
I did not. I don't have any excuse why. I'll do it today. Drop me another email so it would be at the top of my
I'm gonna, like,
email
just
list.
send-
Yes,
yeah.
and then already. Yeah.
Thanks.
Gotta
Also,
figure out why it doesn't do that.
yeah.
Yeah, how did it go?
Pretty good.
Do you know if you passed or not, or did they tell you?
I haven't verbally said anything.
Awesome, congratulations. I'm gonna be bad at that. I have bad memory, so they were gonna ask me stuff and I'll be like, huh?